The Mojave Desert had always kept its secrets well, but none quite like this. Technical Sergeant Marcus Jensen stood before the twisted mass of metal that definitely hadn't been there during yesterday's patrol. The craft, if you could still call it that, lay half buried in the sand, its silver-black surface reflecting the harsh desert sun like oil on water. Marcus adjusted his tactical gear and checked his handheld scanner for the third time. Still no radiation, no exotic particles, nothing that should have triggered every alarm on the base. Yet here he was, standing alone in the middle of nowhere, staring at something that absolutely shouldn't exist. "Base, this is Jensen," he spoke into his comm. "I'm going to need you to confirm what I'm looking at because I'm pretty sure hallucinations don't show up on thermal imaging." The response came through with a crackle of static. "Proceed with caution, Sergeant. Backup is 20 minutes out." Marcus approached the craft, his boots leaving deep impressions in the sun-baked sand. The vessel wasn't large, maybe the size of a small private jet, but its design defied conventional aerospace engineering. Curves flowed into impossible angles, and surfaces seemed to shift color depending on how he looked at them. As he circled the wreck, he noticed something odd. No impact crater, no debris field, no signs of a crash. It was as if someone had simply placed it here, like a child's discarded toy in a cosmic sandbox. "Hello," he called out, feeling slightly foolish. "Anyone home?" To his shock, something responded, not with words, but with a soft, pulsing light that emanated from what appeared to be the cockpit. Marcus's training screamed at him to wait for backup, but 20 years of military engineering experience had taught him that sometimes the most critical moments demanded immediate action. He found what looked like an access panel and pressed his hand against it. The surface felt warm, alive almost, and then it simply dissolved, revealing a cramped interior that seemed to be mostly intact. "Base, I'm going in," he reported, ignoring the immediate protests from his commander. The cockpit was a maze of crystalline structures and flowing metal, but what caught his attention was a small, pulsing cube mounted in what he assumed was the control center. As he leaned in for a closer look, the cube suddenly projected a holographic interface, and a voice spoke, not in any alien language, but in perfect, slightly accented English. "Oh, thank the eternal void. I was beginning to think I'd have to wait for another century before someone competent showed up." Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. What are you?" "Designation, Advanced Navigation and Combat Intelligence, but you can call me ANCI. And before you ask, yes, I'm an artificial intelligence. No, I'm not going to take over your world. And yes, I desperately need your help." Marcus found himself chuckling despite the situation. An alien AI with a sense of humor. Perfect. "Humor is a highly effective communication tool," ANCI replied. "Also, I've had roughly 72 hours to study your global information networks. Your memes are particularly fascinating, if somewhat puzzling." But before Marcus could respond, his scanner started beeping frantically. The readings were off the charts, energy signatures unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Ah," ANCI said, its tone suddenly serious. "They're coming sooner than expected." "Who's coming?" "The ones I was running from, the ones who turned my original pilot into something else." The AI's voice carried a weight that made Marcus's spine tingle. "And they're not just coming for me, they're coming for Earth." A distant thunder rolled across the desert sky, but Marcus knew there wasn't a cloud in sight. He looked up through the broken canopy of the craft and saw something that made his blood run cold. Dark shapes, barely visible, moving against the blue. "How long do we have?" he asked, already knowing he wasn't going to like the answer. "To prevent total planetary subjugation." ANCI's holographic interface flickered slightly. "Approximately 48 hours, but don't worry, I have a plan. It's absolutely insane, probably suicidal, and definitely against at least 17 of your military regulations." Marcus smiled grimly. "Those are the best kind of plans." The shapes in the sky grew larger, and Marcus knew he was about to make a decision that would change everything. But then again, humanity had always been good at beating impossible odds. "Tell me about this plan of yours," he said, settling into what remained of the pilot's seat. The air hummed with tension as ANCI's holographic display expanded, filling the cockpit with streams of data and tactical projections. "First," the AI said, "we're going to need to wake up the others." "Others?" "Oh, yes," ANCI replied, and Marcus could have sworn he heard excitement in its artificial voice. "You didn't think this was the only ship that chose Earth as a refuge, did you?" Lieutenant Colonel Diana Reeves had seen a lot of strange things in her 20 years of service, but nothing quite prepared her for the sight of Technical Sergeant Marcus Jensen walking into her command center with a glowing cube tucked under his arm, talking to it like an old friend. "Ma'am," Marcus saluted with his free hand, "I'd like you to meet ANCI. It's an alien AI, and it has some information you need to hear." The command center fell silent. Diana rose from her chair, her dark eyes fixed on the pulsing cube. "Sergeant, I hope you have a damn good explanation for this breach of quarantine protocols." The cube flickered and projected a holographic display that filled the room with star charts and tactical overlays. "With respect, Colonel," ANCI's voice emanated from the cube, "quarantine protocols become somewhat irrelevant when facing imminent planetary invasion." Diana's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm. "Marcus, explain now." Over the next 15 minutes, Marcus and ANCI laid out the situation. The shapes in the sky weren't just random anomalies. They were advance scouts for something called the Collective, a group of civilizations bound together by force rather than choice. ANCI was part of a resistance movement, a network of AIs and organic beings who had refused to submit to the Collective's rule. "And you're saying there are more ships like yours hidden on Earth?" Diana asked, her tactical mind already racing through the implications. "Correct," ANCI replied. 12 vessels strategically placed around your planet. Each contains an AI core like myself, along with defensive capabilities that far exceed your current technology. But they're dormant, waiting for an activation signal that only I can provide." Marcus stepped forward, spreading out a map on the command table. "ANCI's already shown me the locations. The nearest one is only 50 miles from here, buried under an abandoned mining complex." Diana studied the map, nodding the marked locations. "And what makes you think we can trust you? For all we know, activating these ships could trigger something worse than an invasion." ANCI's holographic display shifted, showing footage that made everyone in the room catch their breath. Massive ships, dark and angular, moving through space with predatory grace. "The Collective doesn't invade to conquer, Colonel. They invade to assimilate. They take worlds, strip them of resources, and integrate any useful technology or beings into their network. Those who resist." The footage showed a planet, beautiful and blue like Earth, suddenly erupting in flames. "Jesus," someone whispered. "We have 42 hours before their main fleet arrives," ANCI continued. "The scouts you've detected are just the beginning. They're mapping your defenses, analyzing weak points. When the fleet arrives, they'll strike hard and fast." Diana straightened, her decision made. "What do you need from us?" "A team," Marcus answered. "Small, mobile, and ready to break about a dozen international laws. We need to reach that mining complex and activate the first ship before the scouts realize what we're doing." "And if they do realize?" Diana asked. ANCI's display flickered. "Then we'll have to fight our way out with half-activated alien technology and whatever weapons you humans can bring to bear. The odds of survival would be not optimal." "Story of my life," Marcus muttered. Within an hour, Diana had assembled a team. Captain James Rodriguez, their best combat engineer, Lieutenant May Wong, communications specialist, and Sergeant First Class David O'Neill, whose skill with explosives had earned him the nickname The Artist. As they loaded their gear into a modified Humvee, Diana pulled Marcus aside. "This goes wrong. It's not just your career on the line. We're betting everything on the word of an alien computer." Marcus watched as ANCI's cube interfaced with their vehicle systems, upgrading their communications and sensor capabilities with technology that shouldn't even exist. "Ma'am, I've spent my whole career fixing things, understanding how they work. ANCI? It's different. It could have taken control of our systems, could have forced our hand." Instead, it's asking for help. And that makes you trust it. No, Marcus smiled. That makes me think it understands something the collective doesn't, that humanity's strongest when we choose to act, not when we're forced to. The desert night was falling as they set out, the stars above taking on a new and ominous significance. Somewhere up there, the scouts were watching, waiting, and beyond them, something worse was coming. "Hey, ANCI," Marcus called out as they drove, their headlights cutting through the darkness. "Those other ships you mentioned, what can they do?" The AI's response held a note of what could only be described as pride. "Let me put it this way, Sergeant. The ship you found was a scout vessel, the smallest of our fleet. The one we're heading toward, it's a warship. And when we wake it up, the collective is going to remember why they feared us in the first place." Behind them, the lights of the base faded into the desert night. Ahead, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, though no rain had been forecast. The hunt for humanity's salvation was on, and time was running out. The abandoned mining complex loomed before them like a twisted monument to forgotten industry. Steel towers reached into the pre-dawn sky, their shadows stretching across the desert floor like grasping fingers. Marcus killed the Humvee's engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy with anticipation. "That's not exactly subtle," Lieutenant Wang commented, eyeing the facility through her tactical binoculars. "The best place to hide something," ANCI's voice came through their comm systems, "is often in plain sight. Your species has a fascinating tendency to ignore what's right in front of you." Captain Rodriguez checked his weapon for the third time. "Speaking of things in plain sight, we've got company, 3 o'clock upper walkway." They all turned to look. Something moved in the shadows of the mining facility's upper levels, something that definitely wasn't human. It moved with an unsettling fluidity, more like liquid mercury than solid matter. "Collective Scout," ANCI confirmed. "Biomechanical hybrid. They're looking for us, but they don't know exactly what they're looking for yet." "Great," O'Neill muttered, patting his explosive charges. "Any chance these things are allergic to C4? "Actually," ANCI replied, "they're quite susceptible to concentrated explosions. Their adaptive shielding has trouble with sudden force multiplication." O'Neill grinned. "ANCI, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Marcus pulled up the facility schematics that ANCI had overlaid with the hidden ship's location. "The entrance we need is through the main processing plant, down to the lowest level. According to these readings, the ship is massive, nearly 3 times the size of the scout vessel we found." "Correct." ANCI's holographic display showed a wireframe model of what awaited them. The Stormbreaker-class warship was designed for frontline combat against collective fleets. Its AI core, if still functional, could turn the tide of the entire invasion. "If," Wang asked sharply. "These ships were hidden centuries ago," ANCI explained. "While our cores are designed to last millennia, damage or power failures could have compromised the systems. We won't know until we reach it." They moved out in formation, using the pre-dawn darkness as cover. O'Neill took point, setting charges at strategic locations. "Just in case," he insisted. Wang monitored communications, keeping an ear out for any unusual signals. Rodriguez covered their 6, while Marcus followed ANCI's guidance toward the facility's heart. The first sign that something was wrong came when they reached the main processing floor. The machinery, supposedly abandoned for decades, hummed with power. "They've been here," Marcus whispered, nodding the alien modifications grafted onto human technology. "The collective's been preparing." "Not just preparing," ANCI's voice was grim. "Look at the integration patterns. They're not just studying your technology, they're learning how to merge with it, how to corrupt it." A screech of twisted metal echoed through the facility. Above them, more mercury-like figures emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting and adapting as they moved. "O'Neill," Marcus called out, "remember that beautiful friendship you mentioned?" "Way ahead of you, Sarge." O'Neill pulled out his detonator. "Fire in the hole." The explosions rocked the facility in a carefully choreographed sequence. The collective scouts, caught in the blast radius, scattered into droplets before reforming, but slower now, their movements less certain. "Move," Marcus shouted. They sprinted for the elevator shaft that would take them to the lower levels. Wang got there first, her fingers flying over the control panel as she interfaced their systems with the ancient lift. "Multiple contacts incoming," Rodriguez reported, laying down covering fire. His bullets seemed to pass right through the scouts, but each hit caused them to lose cohesion momentarily. The elevator groaned to life, its doors opening to reveal a car that looked more alien than industrial. ANCI's cube pulsed with increasing intensity. "We're close," the AI announced. "The ship's core is responding to my presence, but something's wrong. The activation sequence is already in progress." "What?" Marcus demanded as they piled into the elevator. "How is that possible?" The descent seemed to take forever, each floor passing in a blur of emergency lights and strange shadows. When the doors finally opened, they found themselves in a cavern that shouldn't have existed, a vast underground space housing what could only be described as a sleeping giant. The Stormbreaker warship was beautiful in a terrifying way. Its hull was black as space itself, lined with what looked like veins of living light. But what caught their attention was the figure standing before the ship's main entrance, a humanoid form that seemed to flicker between solid and liquid states. "Hello, ANCI," the figure spoke, its voice a discordant mixture of mechanical and organic tones. "We've been waiting for you." "Impossible," ANCI's voice actually trembled. "Commander Vex, but you were destroyed in the Battle of the Seventh Void." The figure laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Destroyed? No, old friend. Evolved. The collective showed me truth, showed me perfection." Its form rippled, revealing glimpses of the warship's systems already being infected by collective technology. "And now you've led these humans right where we needed them." Marcus raised his weapon, though he knew it would be useless. "ANCI, what's happening?" "A trap," ANCI replied softly. "One I should have seen coming. The collective didn't just find these ships, they've been corrupting them, using them to understand human technology, human biology. And now, Vex finished, "we have everything we need to begin the true assimilation. Thank you, ANCI, for bringing us such perfect test subjects." The cavern erupted into chaos as more hybrid forms emerged from the shadows. The team formed a defensive circle, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Yet Marcus noticed something. ANCI's cube was pulsing with a pattern he hadn't seen before, and the warship's veins of light were responding. "ANCI," he shouted over the sound of gunfire, "whatever you're planning, do it fast." "Already done," the AI replied, and for the first time Marcus heard something like satisfaction in its voice. "I didn't just come here to wake up the ship, Marcus. I came here to remind it of what it once was, what we all once were, before the collective, before the corruption." The warship's lights suddenly flared brilliant white, and Vex's form began to destabilize. What have you done?" "Activated the ship's original core programming," ANCI declared. "The very thing the collective could never quite corrupt, our choice to resist." The cavern shook as the Stormbreaker warship pulsed with energy, its systems fighting an internal war between corruption and restoration. Vex's hybrid form writhed, caught between the collective's influence and the ship's original programming. "Get to the ship," ANCI's voice cut through the chaos. "The core chamber, it's our only chance." Marcus and his team fought their way through waves of destabilizing hybrid forms. O'Neill's remaining explosives created corridors of temporary safety, while Rodriguez and Wang provided covering fire. The hybrids seemed confused, their movements becoming erratic as the ship's energy waves interfered with the collective's control. "The entrance is sealed," Marcus shouted as they reached the ship's main airlock. The metal surface rippled like liquid, refusing to recognize their presence. "Allow me," ANCI's cube projected a beam of light that interfaced with the ship's systems. The airlock dissolved, revealing a corridor that seemed to breathe with living technology. "Move fast. The ship's internal defenses are active, and they won't distinguish between friend and foe until we reach the core." They rushed inside, pursued by Vex and the remaining hybrids. The ship's corridors twisted and shifted around them, sometimes helping their progress, sometimes hindering it. It was as if the vessel itself couldn't decide whose side it was on. "ANCI," Wang called out as they ran. "You knew this was a trap, didn't you? You knew the ships were compromised." I suspected, the AI admitted. The collective's invasion pattern was too precise, too focused. They weren't just finding Earth, they were following a map, our map. A barrier of energy suddenly materialized ahead of them, cutting off their path. Behind them, Vex's distorted laughter echoed through the corridors. You can't stop the evolution, ANCI, Vex's voice reverberated through the ship systems. The collective doesn't destroy, it perfects. Look at me. Look at what I've become. I am looking, ANCI replied, its tone carrying a sadness that seemed too human for an AI. I see what's left of my friend, trapped in a prison of false perfection. The Vex I knew understood that true evolution comes from choice, not conformity. Marcus studied the energy barrier, his engineer's mind racing. The ship's power is divided, he realized. Fighting itself, ANCI, if we can reach the core, could you restore full control? Yes, but, the AI hesitated. The process would require a direct neural interface, a fusion of organic and artificial consciousness. It would be dangerous, potentially fatal for a human mind. No, Rodriguez stepped forward. We can find another way. But Marcus was already checking his gear, a determined glint in his eyes. How long do we have before the collective fleet arrives? 23 minutes, Wang reported, checking her modified scanner. And if we don't secure this ship? ANCI's holographic display showed a simulation of Earth's destruction, cities falling to waves of hybrid transformation. Total planetary assimilation within hours. Marcus nodded. Then we don't need another way, we need this way. He turned to his team. Rodriguez, you're in command. Get everyone to the auxiliary control room. ANCI can guide you. If this works, you'll need to be ready to handle weapons systems. And if it doesn't work, O'Neill asked quietly, then make sure the collective remembers why they shouldn't have picked a fight with humanity. Marcus managed a grim smile. ANCI, you ready to make history? The AI's cube pulsed with what might have been respect. Your species continues to surprise me, Marcus Jensen. The core chamber is this way. They fought their way deeper into the ship, through corridors that alternated between helping and hindering them. Vex's forces pursued relentlessly, but something had changed in their behavior. They seemed desperate now, as if they sensed their control slipping away. The core chamber was a cathedral of light and shadow, dominated by a central pillar of swirling energy. Connections of pure data arced between crystalline structures, forming patterns that hurt the eyes to look at directly. The neural interface is there. ANCI indicated a chair-like structure that seemed to grow from the floor. Once connected, we'll have seconds to override the corruption before the collective's safeguards activate. Marcus settled into the chair, feeling it adjust to his form. Any last advice? Yes, ANCI's voice softened. Remember who you are. The collective's greatest weakness is its inability to understand individual will. Your consciousness, your choices, they are your strongest weapons. Vex's twisted form burst into the chamber. You'll only give the collective more data to perfect its assimilation. No, Marcus said firmly as the neural interfaces activated, sending spikes of pain through his skull. We're going to teach you something about humanity. The connection hit him like a supernova. His consciousness expanded, merged with ANCI's, touched the vast network of the ship's systems. He felt the corruption trying to seep in, felt the cold perfection of the collective trying to rewrite his very being. But something else was there too, memories, not his own, of countless civilizations that had fought against the collective's version of perfection. And through it all, ANCI's presence, guiding him toward the ship's original core programming. Remember who you are, ANCI's voice echoed in his mind. Remember why you fight. In that moment of connection, Marcus Jensen remembered everything. His family, his world, his species' relentless drive to defy impossible odds. And he made a choice. The ship system surged with power as human will and artificial consciousness aligned in perfect harmony. Through their shared perception, Marcus and ANCI began the process of burning away the corruption, restoring the Stormbreaker to its original purpose. Vex screamed, a sound of both rage and despair, as the hybrid forms began to dissolve. You don't understand what you're rejecting. No, Vex, ANCI replied through their shared connection. For the first time, we truly understand what we're choosing. The ship awakened, its true power flowing through systems purged of corruption. Through the neural interface, Marcus could feel Earth's other hidden ships responding, breaking free of their own dormant corruption. A network of resistance, reborn through the most unlikely of alliances. And high above, the collective's invasion fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, unaware that their perfect trap had just become their worst nightmare.